C.S. Lewis, with usual brilliance, grasped this years ago. The laws of nature produce no events. They state the pattern to which every event, if only it can be induced to happen, must conform. Just as the rules of arithmetic state the pattern to which all transactions with money must conform, if only you can get a hold of any money. Thus, in one sense, the laws of nature cover the whole field of space and time. In another, what they leave out is precisely the whole real universe. The incessant torrent of actual events which makes up true history, that must come from somewhere else. To think the laws can produce it is like thinking that you can create real money by simply doing sums. For every law says in the last resort, if you have A, then you will get B. But first catch your A. The laws will not do it for you. I submit to you that the world of strict naturalism, in which clever mathematical laws all by themselves bring the universe and life into existence, is pure science fiction. Theories and laws do not do so. And therefore, Stephen Hawking, it seems to me, has signally failed to answer the central question he raises. Why is there something rather than nothing? Alan Sandage, widely regarded as the father of modern astronomy, discoverer of quasars, winner of the Crawford Prize, astronomy's equivalent of the Nobel Prize, is in no doubt about his answer to the question. I find it quite improbable, he says, that such order came out of chaos. There has to be some organizing principle. God to me is a mystery, but is the explanation for the miracle of existence, why there is something rather than nothing. But let me come now to the grand design, because like every other physicist, Hawking is confronted with powerful evidence of design in the fine-tuning of the universe. He explains, our universe and its laws appear to have a design that both is tailor-made to support us, and if we are to exist, leaves little room for alteration. That is not easily explained, and raises the natural question of why it is that way. The discovery relatively recently of the extreme fine-tuning of so many of the laws of nature could lead at least some of us back to the old idea that this grand design is the work of some grand designer. That is not the answer of modern science. Our universe seems to be one of many, each with different laws. Hawking, therefore, recognizes a grand design. He devotes almost an entire chapter to giving extensive details of that fine-tuning, impressive evidence. And it certainly fits in with what he calls the old idea that this grand design is the work of some grand designer. Of course it does, it fits like a glove, because there actually is a grand designer. Now, the idea of a grand designer is certainly old, but the important question to ask is whether or not it is true. Simply to say it is old can give the erroneous impression that what is old is necessarily false and has been superseded. Secondly, it can give the further erroneous impression that no one holds it today. But some of the finest minds in science, at least one Nobel Prize winner in physics, does hold it. The conviction that there is a grand designer is one of the major convictions in the history of human thought. That does not, of course, prove it's true, but it certainly means it's worthy of our serious consideration. Now, Hawking goes therefore too far in saying that is not the answer of modern science. There are scientists who believe it, there are scientists who do not. But his answer is what he calls the multiverse. And that is the idea that there are several many-world scenarios and many universes, some suggest infinitely many, whatever that means. That anything that can happen will happen in some universe, so it's not surprising that at least one universe is like ours. So now we come to the second set of false alternatives, God of the multiverse. But as leading philosophers have pointed out, from a theoretical perspective, why shouldn't God be responsible for the multiverse? The notion that there is a multiverse does not per se exclude a creator. Hawking doesn't seem to mention this at all. But with the multiverse, Hawking moves out beyond science into the realm of philosophy, whose death he has announced rather prematurely. As Paul Paul Davis points out, all cosmological models are constructed by augmenting the results of observation by some sort of philosophical principle. Now, Hawking here claiming to be the voice of modern science on the issue gives a false impression where the multiverse is concerned, since there are very weighty voices within science that do not support his view. Prominent among them, Sir Roger Penrose, Hawking's former collaborator, who shared with him the distinguished Wolf Prize. Of Hawking's use of the multiverse concept in the grand design, Penrose recently said, "It's overused, and this is a place where it's overused. It's an excuse for not having a good theory." That's an immensely strong statement, isn't it? I am tempted to believe, ladies and gentlemen, if you forgive me, that belief in God seems to be a much more rational option if the alternative is to believe that every other universe that can possibly exist does exist, including one in which Richard Dawkins is the Archbishop of Canterbury, Christopher Hitchens the Pope, and Billy Graham has just been voted Atheist of the Year. Now, to be serious once more, but perhaps I was being serious, Hawking's ultimate theory to explain why the laws of physics are as they are is called M-theory, a theory of supersymmetric gravity that involves very sophisticated concepts such as vibrating springs in 11 dimensions. Hawking confidently calls it the unified theory that Einstein was expected to find. Now, if it is, and I'm not in a position to judge it, it will be a triumph of mathematical physics. But for the reasons given above, far from administering the death blow to God, it will give us even more insight into his creatorial wisdom. Don Page, a theoretical physicist from the University of Alberta, who's a former student of Hawking and has co-authored 8 papers with him, says, and he gave me permission to quote his letter to me, he says, "I certainly would agree that even if M-theory were a fully formulated theory, which it isn't, and were correct, which of course we don't know, that would not imply that God did not create the universe." So although it does not affect my argument this evening at all, ladies and gentlemen, it should just be noted that not all physicists are as convinced as Hawking about the validity of M-theory. Roger Penrose says it's very far from any testability. And he says the grand design is a bit misleading. It gives you this impression of a theory that's going to explain everything. It's nothing of the sort. It is not even a theory. Indeed, in Penrose's estimation, M-theory was hardly science. Now, please notice, Penrose's criticisms are scientific, not theological. He is, in fact, a member of the British Humanist Association. Tim Radford did a wonderful review of the grand design. In this very brief history of modern cosmological physics, the laws of quantum and relativistic physics represent things to be wondered at, but widely accepted, just like biblical miracles. M-theory invokes something different, a prime mover, a begetter, a creative force that is everywhere and nowhere. This force cannot be identified by instruments or examined by comprehensible mathematical prediction, and yet it contains all possibilities. It incorporates omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence, and it's a big mystery. Remind you of anybody? I move to advance the cause of atheism by means of a highly speculative, untestable theory that is not within the zone of evidence-based science, and which, even if it were true, could not dislodge God in any case, is not exactly calculated to impress. Now, finally, ladies and gentlemen, much of the rationale behind Hawking's argument lies in the idea that there's a deep-seated conflict between science and religion. That is not a discord I recognize. For me, as a Christian believer, the beauty of the scientific description of the universe reinforces my faith in an intelligent divine creator. Indeed, the very reason that science flourished so vigorously in the 16th and 17th centuries under men like Galileo, Kepler, and Newton had a great deal to do with their conviction that the laws of nature reflected the influence of a divine lawgiver. Far from belief in God hindering science, it was arguably the motor that drove it. Now, the fact that science is a rational activity, or mainly so, helps us to identify another flaw, as I see it in Hawking's thinking. Like Francis Crick, he wants us to believe that we human beings are nothing but mere collections of fundamental particles of nature. Hawking reduces biology to physics and chemistry and concludes, it is hard to see how free will can operate if our behavior is determined by physical law. So it seems we are no more than biological machines, and that free will is just an illusion. Now that's a debate to introduce in the last 3 minutes of a lecture in Scotland. But let me content myself by citing a comment on the implications of this kind of determinism by Sir John Polkinghorne, who taught me quantum physics at Cambridge years ago. He says this, in the opinion of many thinkers, human freedom is closely connected with human rationality. If we were deterministic beings, what would validate the claim that our utterance constituted rational discourse? Would not the sounds issuing from mouths or the marks we made on paper be simply the actions of automata? All proponents of deterministic theories, whether social and economic Marx, or sexual Freud, or genetic Dawkins and E.O. Wilson, need a covert disclaimer on their own behalf, accepting their own contribution from reductive dismissal. Hawking's name, I think, could reasonably be therefore added to that list. It seems to me, ladies and gentlemen, that the principal objection to all of this is not so much theological. It's that this reductionist view undermines the very rationality that we need to do science. I do not see a conflict between science and religion as such, but I do see a conflict. The conflict lies at the deeper level of worldview. And so far as tonight's lecture is concerned, it is the diametrical opposition between the worldview of materialism and the worldview of theism, materialism stroke naturalism, if you like. And right from the ancient world, we've been presented with these two worldviews. The ancient Greek thinkers, brilliant, Leucippus and Democritus, who gave us the atomic theory, thought that there were two things, essentially, atoms and the void, and as the atoms poured through the void, they created stars, the universe, the world, and life. The other worldview, which was supported by Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, was that this material universe is not all that exists. There is God or the gods. And so those two views come barreling up towards us and find themselves now of great interest in the Academy, as your presence here this evening indicates. So I do see a conflict. It is a conflict between these two worldviews, but I want you to notice there are scientists on each side of it. Science, as the chaplain said in her introduction, I want to argue, sits much less comfortably with atheism than it does with theism. The materialistic worldview tells me in the end that my mind is my brain, and it's the end product of a mindless, unguided process. Why then, as Darwin himself worded, why then should it tell me truth? On the other hand, there is another worldview, and that says that the reason that the scientist can understand in her mind something of the universe out there is that ultimately the origin of both goes back to an intelligent creation. So we're faced with two worldviews. One starts in the beginning with mass energy, the particles, and everything is derivative, including information. The other says the exact opposite. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came to be through him. So in the first worldview, mass energy is primary and mind is derivative. In the other worldview, mind is primary and mass energy is derivative. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not simply my Christianity, but my science that leads me to prefer that view to the atheist view.